This is not a film that sees conspiracies. It's not a film that mongers fear. It's not a film that blames bankers or politicians. It's a film that questions the systems we've created and suggests ways to reform them. Over centuries, systems have been subtly modified, manipulated, and even corrupted, often to serve the interests of the few. We have continually accepted these changes, and because man can adjust to living under virtually any conditions, the trait that's enabled us to survive is the very trait that has suppressed us.
Most societies have an elite tries to stay in power. And the ways they stay in power is not merely by controlling the means of production, to be Marxist, i.e. controlling the money, but by controlling the cognitive map, the way we think. And what really matters in that respect is not so much what is actually said in public, but is what is left undebated, unsaid.
For centuries, gatekeepers have manipulated our cognitive map. But in 1989, a computer scientist by the name of Tim Berners-Lee implemented the first successful communication between an HTTP client and server. The World Wide Web was born. It has since unleashed a tsunami of instantly accessible, freely available information. Just as Gutenberg's printing press wrestled control of the cognitive map away from an ecclesiastical and royal elite, today the internet is beginning to change governments, finance, and the media. We are at the cusp of change. But to enact it, we must first understand the things that have been left unsaid for so long. To do that, we need context from people who speak the truth in the face of collective delusion, because to understand something is to be liberated from it.
The end of World War II, we had 50% of the world's gross domestic product. We were making 54,000 airplanes a year, 7,000 ships, et cetera, and we were the new Rome. And we recognized it and devised a power management scheme in the 1947 National Security Act to, we thought, manage it. And it worked fairly well during the Cold War. But we haven't done anything since, and I think that's another sign of our inability to grasp the new world, if you will.
Empires do not begin or end on a certain date, but they do end, and the West has not yet come to terms with its fading supremacy. At the end of every empire, under the guise of renewal, tribes, armies, and organizations appear and devour the heritage of the former superpower, often from within. In his essay, The Fate of Empires, the soldier, diplomat, and traveler Lieutenant General Sir John Glubb analyzed the life cycle of empires. He found remarkable similarities between them all. An empire lasts about 250 years, or 10 generations, from the early pioneers to the final conspicuous consumers who become a burden on the state. 6 ages defined the lifespan of an empire. The age of pioneers, the age of conquests, the age of commerce, the age of affluence, the age of intellect, ending with bread and circuses in the age of decadence. There are common features to every age of decadence. An undisciplined, overextended military, the conspicuous display of wealth, a massive disparity between rich and poor, a desire to live off a bloated state, and an obsession with sex. But perhaps the most notorious trait of all is the debasement of the currency. The United States and Great Britain both began on a gold or silver standard, long since abandoned. Rome was no different.
So it started on a principle that was very sound, and it was on a silver standard. But as it corrupted further and further and further, the Roman denarius got to the point where it was basically a copper coin, and they learned how to plate, and it was washed in silver, and in circulation the plating came off. And at the end, all the senators that really did at one time represent the people only were interested in representing how much wealth they could steal at the top.
Great empire wealth always dazzles, but beneath the surface, the unbridled desire for money, power, and material possessions means that duty and public service are replaced by leaders and citizens who scramble for the spoils.
Historically, all the signs of the demise of empire are beginning to develop. Some are more trenchant than others. This current financial and economic crisis, that sort of thing always accompanies the demise of empire.
The people of Rome were constantly being distracted by the gladiatorial events, and the politicians knew that they did this. Whenever there was unrest among the people, they had a huge event going on, and they created a new event with lots and lots of gladiators, and every day we're doing that. That is a common trait of declining empires. And so today in the United States, for example, you find a tremendous emphasis on all kinds of television programs that distract people from what's really going on. Sports is a big part of that, as it was in the gladiator times. In essence, we've been lulled into a lethargy, and we've accepted it.
Just as our sports stars today earn vast sums, so did Roman charioteers. In the 2nd century, one by the name of Gaius Apuleius Diocles amassed a fortune of 35 million sesterces in prize money, equivalent to several $1 billion today. Strangely, perhaps, there's another profession that is disproportionately hallowed as an empire declines. The Romans, the Ottomans, and the Spanish all made celebrities of their chefs.
And this, again, is typifying the end of an empire, where things were so great, we have this last oomph of momentum that we used to be great, and we felt great, and we don't feel it anymore. So everyone is out searching for it. Well, maybe it's in the best food, or the best clothes, or the best music, or the best movies, or a reality TV show, or another magazine. But you can never get enough of what you don't need. What you need is a strong moral conviction that is pervasive throughout the society, and integrity reigns.
The baby boomer generation were born into this age of decadence. Perhaps unwittingly, they've broken the unspoken intergenerational contract. Through unfettered consumerism, spiraling house prices, and a desire for eternal youth, the baby boomers have squandered future generations' inheritance.
My generation, the generation right after my generation, I think we forgot that little phrase in the preamble to our Constitution, which says, "and our posterity." All of a sudden it became us, period.
The baby boom generation, which I'm a part of, has gone and done the biggest misallocation of capital in the history of mankind. We have had cheap oil, or cheap energy is a better way to phrase it. We've had an abundance of ideas, and we have chosen a system and perpetuated it that is probably one of the worst ways to use the blessings that were bestowed upon us. And we are going to pay a price for that.
Human beings are inconsistent and paradoxical. We hope for peace and immortality, but continually invent new ways to destroy each other. We're capable of the kindest, most noble acts and the most horrific atrocities.
Human beings are complex creatures. I mean, for example, we're capable right now, at this minute, of acting in such a way as to make it likely, if not certain, that our grandchildren are going to face terrible disasters. And we're consciously acting to accelerate that likelihood, even though we all love our grandchildren. How can you be more contradictory than that?
Why, with such brilliant knowledge on the planet, are we still struggling to distribute wealth fairly? How has the human race developed a flawed system of government and economics that serves the few at the expense of the many? And with such poverty in an age of plenty, why have we not had the will to change such a vicious social structure?
Greed is the fundamental kind of ingredients for the immoral economy. The problem is not that there is not enough in the world. People say that there's a poverty, we have to create more wealth. There is enough in the world for everybody's need, as Mahatma Gandhi said, but not for anybody's greed.
But is it just greed, or does it go deeper than that? Is the problem systemic?
As a civilization, we've obviously had a great run. We've done very well. We had the Industrial Revolution. We survived that. We've built a lot of modern military technology. We've survived that so far. We built a banking system, and we're still struggling with that part of it. But you know, we've had a good run.
It's kind of like when I was working on Wall Street for 7 years. I had the experience some people would have. Let's say working at a meat processing plant, they become vegetarian. You know, you work on Wall Street and you see how these banks like Goldman, JP Morgan, these other banks make money. When you see money, it kind of makes you sick.
Well, I think if the people knew what the banking system is up to, as Henry Ford said, there would be a revolution tomorrow morning. The fact is, most people think that what a bank does is lend you money that someone else has put in the bank previously. But what a bank actually does, what a commercial bank does, is to create money from nothing and then lend it to you at interest. If I do that, if I manufacture money in my own home, it's called counterfeiting. If an accountant creates money out of nothing in the company accounts, it's called cooking the books. But if a bank does it, it's perfectly legal. And so long as you allow fraud to be legalized, then all kinds of problems are going to pop up in the economic system, which you can't do anything about.
Private banks create money out of nothing and lend it at interest. Now, that sounds absurd. When I teach sophomores, about money and banking and how banks, they never believe it. And so you have to go through it again and again. Yes, banks really do create money. They really do. Here's how it happens. And it's absurd, and they're right to doubt that could possibly be what's really going on. But it is.
Now, if the banking lobby is very strong, they're going to say, well, we don't want to change this system. We're making so much money out of it. What we have to do is, A, try and convince the people that it's their fault, that their wage claims are too high, and that's why we're having lots of inflation, or people are speculating on housing, and that's why house prices are going up. What they're not going to say is that this is happening because banks are creating money out of nothing and pumping it into the system, and that's why prices are going up.
But how is it that we've ended up with a system in which banks have the power to create money? Since 1971, when President Nixon took the United States off what was left of the gold standard, the world has operated under a system of money known as fiat. The dollar, the pound, the euro are all government fiat currencies. Fiat is a Latin word meaning let it be so. It is the law that this government currency be money. Indeed, without that legal enforcement and the fact that we must pay taxes with this money, that dollar bill or that computer digit that represents a dollar would be pretty much meaningless. Only the government has the power to issue fiat money, but banks can create it through lending. Over the last 40 years, since this system of fiat money became the global norm, the supply of money has grown exponentially. In fact, we've seen the greatest growth in the supply of money in history. But who benefits? Of course, those that have the power to issue money, governments and banks. Then, those companies and individuals that get this money early. They can spend it before the prices of the things they want to buy have risen to reflect the new money in circulation. In other words, they get services, products or assets cheap. But prices soon rise, so holders of assets such as houses or shares will then see gains without there necessarily being any improvements to the company or house in question. Often this can lead to speculative bubbles. But what about those at the bottom of the pyramid? Those on fixed wages or incomes, those who live in remote areas, or those with savings? By the time this newly created money and bigger.
When you get off the gold standard and you go into a fiat money currency, combined with a fractional reserve banking system, you end up compounding debt faster than you can ever possibly produce to support that debt. So eventually you're going to find yourself back into debt slavery. And that's what's happened in the U.S. For every dollar of GDP, for example, in the U.S., it also creates something like $5.50 worth of debt. Because this is what happens when our economy flips over and basically capsizes. And of course, the government solution now to address all the problems is basically to create more debt.
You can never get enough of a currency that doesn't work. You can print it till kingdom comes, but you can't print wealth, and you can't get yourself out of debt by making more debt. If you could print wealth, Zimbabwe would be the largest, most prosperous country on the planet. We all know it doesn't work.
Of the money in the world today, 97% of it is debt. The French philosopher Voltaire once said, "All paper money eventually returns to its intrinsic value, 0." For 3 generations, the world watched the fight between capitalism and communism. But in the 1980s, the Russian economy started to collapse. The Soviet Union capitulated, and so-called capitalism reigned supreme.
Before 1989, we had a battle between communism and the market. And in that battle, there was a sense of, let's not expose the flaws in the market economy. This is too important of a battle that you don't criticize our team while we're fighting their team. And their team, associated with authoritarianism, with a failure to deliver well-being to their society, it was very clear that if you had to choose between these two, which was better?
Communism failed first for various reasons. I think it was inefficient, human rights, lack of respect, so forth. So capitalist West has been continuing in a triumphalist mode, thinking, our adversary has failed. That means we're doing everything right. Both systems are trying to do something which is fundamentally impossible, grow forever. And they're both going to fail. One failed first. Capitalism's going to fail later, or it's failing now.
America right now is in a very interesting position because in the past 200-300 years of its history, it's a culture and country which has almost always existed on the assumption that resources could be expanded. If there was a problem, you always try to deal with it by expanding the pie. Go west, young man. Make the pie bigger so that everyone's got a bigger piece. Now it's facing a world where possibly resources are beginning to be more constrained and where it's going to have to divide up that pie and inflict pain on people. And that's something which it is not well prepared for.
How has the country moved so far from the intentions of its founding fathers? How has the American dream become so distorted?
Over the last 30 or 40 years, capitalism has taken this extreme form. And a lot of it goes back to the economist Milton Friedman from the Chicago School and Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and others buying into these policies that really encourage people to take on huge amounts of debt, encourage privatization, smaller government supposedly, although bigger military, so actually the government spending goes up. Deregulation, getting rid of rules that govern the people who run our institutions, especially our corporations. It's as though we suddenly are supposed to believe that the human beings who sit at the top of corporations don't need to be regulated. They're some sort of gods.
Milton Friedman, his protégés the Chicago Boys, and the neoclassical ideology beat the classical approach to economics and became the framework for what we today call capitalism. There are 2 main competing economic approaches which determine how we humans manage the world and distribute wealth. These are the classical and neoclassical schools. The classical school favours less government interference, more personal autonomy, and recognises that humans cannot function without natural resources. The neoclassical school, which has a more dismissive view of natural resources, thinks government should rule the economy, solve social problems, and leave the free market to look after the distribution of wealth. The neoclassical school emerged around 100 years ago due to vested interests' desire to protect their assets. This meant that neoclassical mathematical models and assumptions were divorced from reality. They're based on what ought to be, instead of the classical models which are based on what actually is. It's these neoclassical models, which favour large corporations, that have been used to legitimize the financialization of the global economy. Championed by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, neoclassical economics still dominates policy-making today.
The Reagan Revolution, as we call it in the United States, obviously the Reagan-Thatcher Revolution, if you think about it more globally, was a big change in power structure and a big transfer of opportunity and wealth. Now, it's not that the poor gave it to the rich. It was a transfer within the well-to-do. So the financial sector, in particular, in the United States, for example, but also in the UK and some other places, became vastly more profitable. And wages in that sector went up a lot. I mean, we focus on bonuses, but it's also base salaries went up a lot, overall compensation. So there's a transfer from the non-financial part of the economy to the financial part of the economy that actually is unprecedented as far as we can see in any of the available data to us. And I'm talking about all of recorded human history.
In 1932, in the aftermath of America's great stock market crash, a piece of legislation was passed to protect society. The Glass-Steagall Act was introduced to separate ordinary high street banking from investment banking. 67 years later, in 1999, under the influence of Treasury Secretary Larry Summers and his predecessor Robert Rubin, President Bill Clinton repealed the Glass-Steagall Act. Once again, banks could take ordinary depositors' money and speculate with it on virtually anything they liked.
Wall Street has become a very particular type of casino. And it's unfortunately not the kind of casino they have in Las Vegas, which is, perfectly legitimate form of entertainment. It is a casino that has massive negative repercussions on the rest of society. So it's not just losing your money on a few wild nights. It's about the way in which those organizations lose their money, impacting the whole of society, leading to a massive loss of jobs.
This unfettered gambling pushed the entire global financial system to near collapse. With balances and debt obligations larger than the GDP of entire countries, the banks had become too big to fail. The West was unprepared, and bankers met their reeling and disorientated governments.
You have to bail us out. We need money. If you don't give us the money, the whole thing goes down. And what are you going to do with millions and tens of millions of people who have lost everything in their bank account? You will have a revolution on your hands. So fork over the money. Borrow the money, create it out of nothing, and give it back to us, and so that we can face our problems and not go under, or otherwise. And this is what Mr. Hank Paulson did in the U.S. Congress. He went there one day and he told them, well, look, we need $700 billion, and we need it now, or else.
Is this system we call capitalism really capitalism? In a capitalist system, government is supposed to be small. But today the state is more bloated and invasive than it's ever been. Individuals and companies are supposed to operate in a free market. Good enterprise is rewarded with profit, and flawed enterprise with failure. But during the 2008 banking crisis, the people saw the Western economic system divided in a way they were told could never happen.
Socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor. And in America, for example, the banks that got in trouble got bailed out by the government. That's socialism. And people are arguing against socialism in America, and yet this is probably the most socialist country in the world right now.
We have a system which isn't even a proper capitalist system. Rich people make mistakes that they don't get punished. Poor people make mistakes that they get punished. Yeah? Or even worse, that they don't make any mistake and they are forced to pay for the mistakes of the rich.
When the taxpayer is footing the bill for the misplaced speculation of bankers, then suddenly, instead of the economy serving the human being is now in perpetual service to amoral financial organizations.